Einstein once said that only the work of Galileo can be seen as the real beginning of astronomy and physics. All before that might have been science, but notes in a way we are thinking about that term today. Galileo was the first person pointing a telescope to the sky and making incredible observations about our cosmos. He discovered several bodies in our solar system, spotted sunspots, and that the sun rotates, and even confirmed the fact that all planets are moving on orbits around the sun, but not the Earth. Especially this last discovery led him into serious trouble with the Catholic Church and eventually led to a sentence for house arrest to the end of his life. As his life was so amazing and he changed the way we think about physics so heavily, we want to share with you 10 facts about Galileo Galilei. You definitely need to know.
Galileo has spent 10 years under house arrest shortly after Galileo published his book Dialogue Concept, The Two Chief World System in 1632. He was sentenced by the Roman Inquisition to imprisonment. Already 1 day later, this was commuted to house arrest. The last 10 years of his life, he spent at his villa in Archer 3 near Florence. During that time, it was provided for him to publish any book, and the people allowed to visit him were restricted. He was even to read the 7 penitentiary plans once a week for the next 3 years. Never Galileo received several visitors from abroad, including poet John Milton and philosopher Thomas Hobbes. On one occasion, Galileo was even able to smuggle out his manuscript for his latest book, The Sources and Mathematical Demonstration Relating to New Science, which is considered as one of his finished works. It was published in 1638 and was Galileo's final book. In the same year, he went completely blind and died on January 8, 1642 at age 77.
And now, fact number 2. Galileo lost 3 of his fingers almost 1 century after he died. This fact seems a bit strange, as one might be questioning how an almost 100-year-old can lose 3 fingers. However, in 1737, almost 100 years after Galileo's death, his body was exhumed from a side chapel at the Church of St. Croix in Florence to transfer his remains to the church's main basilica. While doing so, what if Galileo's admirers removed 3 fingers and a tooth from his body? Although it is not clear who exactly took the fingers and the tooth from Galileo's, historians assume that these body parts were handed down through generations of the admirers' relatives. At one point in time, the items were thought to be lost forever. However, in 1999, they appeared again during an audition at private collection, was able to deduce the origin and return at least Galileo's middle finger to the authorities. It is currently on exhibition at the Museum Galileo in Florence, Italy.
Number 3. The Catholic Church didn't admit that Galileo was right until 1992. It's been a long time since Galileo Galilei was found vehemently suspect on hearsay and sentenced to life imprisonment by the Catholic Church in 1632. Only in 1979, an investigation on the church's determination of Galileo was initiated by Pope John Paul II. It took them 30 years of even 359 years since Galileo was sentenced to imprisonment to find a conclusion in 1992. The Catholic Church closed their investigation and released a formal apology. The statement placed most of the blame of the churchless who worked on Galileo's case during that time, but not on Pope Urban VIII, who presided over the trial. Also, the charge of heresy was
Number
never
4. Galileo didn't invent the telescope. Although Galileo is often named as the inventor of the telescope, he actually just improved it, but did not have the idea from scratch. Instead, the Dutch eyeglass maker Hans Slippersay can be credited with the creation of the telescope. At least, this is what the earliest record of the telescope says. Slippersay tried to patent his idea from the device in 1609, but with no success, as it was too easy to copy in the eyes of the Dutch government. In the same year, Galileo learned about the device and Phillips his own telescope by improving Lipps Assay's idea significantly, Soon he had a telescope that could magnify 20 or even 30 times. He started to point the telescope at the moon and became the first person to realize that this astronomical body is full of craters and mountains against the common belief that it has a smooth surface. With this new device, Galileo was also able to discover certain other
Number
astronomical
5. It is very unlikely that Galileo Galilei really dropped anything of the Leaning Tower of Pisa. Galileo has spent his early life and career in Pisa, so the famous tower in Pisa might be a perfect match to test his theories of motion and falling bodies. However, there is only one written account of Galileo's performing some kind of experiments close to what the common myth says about it's true, and Galileo really dropped a small object ballast from top of tower in Pisa would have probably been such a grand spectacular. There will be more documentaries about it, and this is not the case. It's highly unlikely that Galileo dropped anything from the Leaning Tower of Pisa.
Number 6. King Louis XIV asked Galileo to discover new planets in the name of France. When Galileo discovered Jupiter and 4 of its moons in 1610, he immediately rose to fame. He called the moons the Medici and stars to honor his patron Cosimo II from the Medici family, who ruled over Tuscany in Italy. As soon as the news spread across Europe, King Louis XIV from France was asking Galileo if he could also name further planets he might discover after him, but Galileo never did number.
Number 7. The similarity between Galileo's first and last name is no coincidence. During the days of Galileo's lifetime, people in the Italian region of Tuscany used to name their first son after the family last name, as Galileo was the first of 6 children in his family. He got the pleasure to receive the name of his family as his first name. However, there might also be another explanation that Galileo's first name chose his last name. According to another common theory, Galileo might also be named after a famous ancestor of his family, Galileo.
Galileo Galilei wrote about the general relativity long before Einstein did. It seems obvious that this fact about Galileo does not say that Galileo discovered the general theory of relativity long before Einstein did, but nevertheless he has some similar thoughts on the topic as Einstein almost 300 years after him. Like Einstein, Galileo was also thinking that the term movement might differ based on your personal perception. If you're standing in a windowless cabin on a ship, Galileo proclaimed that you will have no chance to tell if this ship is moving at a steady speed or if it is motionless. That's exactly the same thought Einstein had when thinking about his general theory of relativity.
Number 9. Galileo was a college dropout. Galileo's father, Vincenzo Galilei, was not a scientist as his son would later become, but a music theorist born in Pisa, Italy. Although Vincenzo was born into a noble family, he was never wealthy due to the fact that Vincenzo never wanted his son live in poverty and indigence. When Galileo approached him the idea to become a monk, he therefore refused his proposal and enrolled him at the University of Pisa to study medicine. Galileo, however, was never really into medicine, but rather more interested in mathematics and astronomy, so he shifted his focus to these two objects. In 1585, Galileo eventually left school with a learning degree and continued his studies on his own. To finance these studies, he gave private lessons and turned back in 1589 to the University of Pisa
Number
to teach.
10. There was a spacecraft named Galileo in 1989. NASA launched the space shuttle Atlantis, delivering the spacecraft Galileo into orbit. The spacecraft was developed to study the planet Jupiter and several of its moons, as well as also some other bodies in our solar system. Galileo arrived at Jupiter on December 7, 1995, and became the first spacecraft to orbit Jupiter. It is no coincidence that NASA took the name of Galileo Galilei for a spacecraft studying Jupiter, as Galileo himself dedicated a huge part of his life to explore this planet and its moons. The mission came to an end in 2003 when NASA crashed the spacecraft internationally into Jupiter to eliminate the risks of the spacecraft to collide the Jupiter's moon Europa and contaminating any potential life there. We hope you enjoyed our 10 facts about Galileo as much as we did. His impact on physics and astronomy was incredible and changed our understanding of making our universe, although it took several hundred years until we understood it correctly.
He was the oldest of 7 siblings. He belonged to a family of lower nobility who took care of his education until he was 10 years old. At that age, his parents left to Florence and left Galileo in care of a neighbor, Jacob Borghini, who enrolled him in the monastery of Santa Maria de Vallombrosa in Florence. There he received a pious education that led him to consider entering religious life, which his father disliked and took advantage of an invention his son has to take him out. In 1581, he entered the University of Pisa, where he studied medicine, philosophy, and
to the legend, and so it should be taken, Galileo discovered the principle of the pendulum while attending Mass at the Duomo, the magnificent Cathedral of Pisa. One day in 1581, Galileo Galilei, a 70 years old medical student, was attending Mass at the Cathedral of Pisa. During the liturgy, Galileo noticed that the beautiful candle lamp that hung from the ceiling of the cathedral's means of a long chain was moving. Galileo, who apparently the ceremony couldn't grab his attention, noticed that at first the lamp moved quickly, and then after a while, when the oscillations were smaller at a lower speed, intrigued by the matter, he measured its oscillation counting his pulse on his wrist. The time it took the lamp to complete an oscillation was always the same and did not depend on the amplitude of the oscillations. He had discovered a property of the simple pendulum, which holds true for small oscillations known as ESO shortings.